Not only are we going to New Hampshire, Tom Harkin, we're going to South Carolina and Oklahoma and Arizona and North Dakota and New Mexico. And we're going to California and Texas and New York. And we're going to South Dakota and Oregon and Washington and Michigan. And then we're going to Washington, D.C. to take back the White House. Yeah!
That was replayed on TV thousands of times, and that altered the course of history. Howard Dean was the Democratic frontrunner for the 2004 election, and then that simple sound completely derailed his campaign and led to him losing the primaries against John Kerry, who then lost the election to George W. Bush. But that leaves us with a question. What if this that indirectly reshaped history never happened? What if Dean didn't scream? Howard Dean led early polls in the 2004 Democratic Primaries. He had enormous fundraising success through small donors, a highly mobilized online base, which was unprecedented in 2004, and strong anti-war positioning at a time when Iraq was deteriorating. But then came the fatal Iowa caucus. Dean came in third despite being the frontrunner. And later that day, Howard Dean gave a speech that ended with, that was the final blow. Dean's campaign lost all momentum. Now normally nobody would care about a small sound like that. So why was this noise specifically so impactful? The media manipulated millions of Americans by replaying the scream the same way I did so far.
Coming all the way to Washington, D.C. to take back the White House!
They turned Howard Dean into a joke when he was anything but a joke. I hope that me replaying the scream showed you how quickly you can dismiss someone and take them as a total joke. But why did the media even manipulate Dean's campaign so much? Well, they simply despised him. They thought he's too progressive, too energized and unelectable. That's why they exploited the small slip-up so heavily. So in reality, it wasn't the scream that destroyed Howard Dean's campaign, it was the media. And now, in this alternate world, the media has nothing to exploit because Dean doesn't scream. Dean didn't scream, but he still came in third in the Iowa caucus. The media, like in our time, paints his campaign as dead, but this time they have no actual attacking point against him. They try to paint him as angry and unelectable, but without the scream, that attack falls flat. A week later, Dean reaches a close second in New Hampshire. In our timeline, Dean's campaign faltered and he skipped several contests. But here, with no scream to taunt him, his close second place finish in New Hampshire is seen as proof of his resilience. And Howard Dean still has one ace his competitors don't have: massive grassroots internet fundraising. Neither John Kerry nor John Edwards can match his resources, and that results in a comeback on Super Tuesday. He wins both New York and California, where anti-war sentiments are stronger. John Edwards, the third place contender, drops out a day later. By this point, Dean is slightly ahead of Kerry, and Democratic voters see Dean as a real progressive challenger, not a meme. John Kerry still has that whole electability argument, but Dean now has momentum Kerry simply can't match. Slowly and steadily, Howard Dean pulls further ahead of John Kerry thanks to his online grassroots support and momentum. By the time of the Democratic National Convention in July, Howard Dean secures enough delegates. Now, Dean must pick a vice president to face incumbent George W. Bush. He could go for his prior competitor John Edwards to unify the party and get that southern charisma, but I think Dean needs to be more strategic here. His biggest weakness against Bush is his lack of foreign policy experience. And with ongoing terror fears, that is a serious disadvantage. To counter this, Dean picks retired General Wesley Clark as his running mate, forming the Dean-Clark ticket to challenge Bush-Cheney. Dean's anti-war stance remains a liability, as most Americans in 2004 still believed invading Iraq was the right decision. But with his vice president pick Wesley Clark, Dean can present himself as a moderate that's skeptical of the Iraq war, not staunchly against it. Instead of campaigning on we shouldn't have invaded Iraq, he can campaign on more concrete steps to democratize Iraq, which is something Bush of course failed. He also states that he will reshift the war on terror's focus to capturing bin Laden and Al-Qaeda al-Qaeda to get America the justice it deserves. But Bush, thanks to 9/11, still has a positive approval rating. Can Howard Dean even win this election? The answer is yes, but it will be close. John Kerry lost to Bush by 35 electoral votes. Now, Dean's liberal image might alienate a few moderates, but I'm certain he would win the same states as Kerry. And Howard Dean still has his ace, a weapon that has never been truly used by Democrats: youth and online mobilization. And really, all Howard Dean needs to win is to flip a single crucial swing state like Ohio. During debates, Dean was infamous to appear angry and energized, something that ultimately hurt him in our time. But I think in a Rust Belt state, that raw energy would actually play into his hands, and we simply cannot forget the power of his grassroots fundraising. Having an energized base is insanely important during elections. It's arguably even more important than swaying over moderates. Howard Dean pioneered online fundraising, and his base would be incredibly energized during the 2004 election. But still, with Bush's approval rating, the election is very close and could realistically go both ways. I believe Howard Dean would narrowly win Ohio, thanks to his style of rhetoric and highly energized base. That puts him at 271 electoral votes, a very narrow victory, but a victory nonetheless. The United States of America has just voted in their first progressive president. In post-election interviews, Dean vows to reshift the war on terror, improve America's healthcare, push for clean energy investments, strengthen grassroots democracy and multilateral diplomacy. And the moment he steps into the Oval Office, Howard Dean quickly gets to work. He orders a phased withdrawal from Iraq, with the majority of troops returning home by 2008. Under Dean's command, the Pentagon shifts towards training and advising allies in Iraq, only using the US military directly for special forces operations. The immediate effects are rocky: increased tensions and Iranian influence. However, US military casualties drop quickly, a huge political win for Dean, and the long-term stability of Iraq improves. Republicans attack Dean for this quote-unquote weakness in Iraq, but liberals see the reduced US casualties as a huge win. And it's not like Howard Dean plans to stop the war on terror. Instead, he shifts focus back to Afghanistan, to capturing bin Laden and to bringing down al-Qaeda. He also begins rebuilding strained NATO ties from the Iraq War, making his presidency welcomed by Paris, Berlin and Brussels. Cooperation between Europe and the US surges again. President Dean also pushes a green jobs and infrastructure initiative, focusing on renewable energy and energy efficiency. Later, he proposes a bill that includes modest tax rollbacks for the middle class, with tax increases on high earners to fund them. But the Senate blocks the bill, forcing him to rely on weaker executive orders. He also launches executive orders to increase transparency in campaign financing, to limit soft money and strengthen disclosure. Critics argue he's only doing that because he wants to increase his chances of re-election. But going beyond policy, Dean's 2004 victory taught the US the power of grassroots support, completely reshaping the American political landscape. Politicians running for office now know how important it is to energize their base. It's arguably even more important than swaying the media to your side, as Dean has proven. This strengthens populists both on the right and left, and weakens the influence of the political establishment. And as a result, already in 2005, the Tea Party movement begins to quietly emerge, 4 years sooner than in our time. And Donald Trump switches to the Republican Party way sooner, shortly after Dean enters office. He did that in our time because he thought Obama was too liberal. I'm certain he'd do the same under President Dean. By the end of 2005, Dean's presidency is seen as very polarizing. Left-leaning and European media praises him, while the GOP and right-wing media scrutinize him for every foreign policy decision. Throughout 2006, Dean focuses to consolidate his reforms. He pushes for fund training and reconstruction programs in Iraq. With the backing of his Vice President Clark, Dean manages to get enough votes in the Senate and a large Iraq rebuilding bill passes. Meanwhile, the gradual troop withdrawal continues. By the end of 2006, Iraq is in quite a different position than in our time. US airstrikes and special operations are still ongoing, but with the focus on Afghanistan, the US doesn't manage to take down al-Zarqawi. Instead, he is further driven into hiding and obscurity. And with al-Zarqawi staying alive, his terror network AQI, which stands for Al-Qaeda Iraq, remains. That sounds pretty bad, right? But, and hear me out here, long term, that's actually a good thing. The chaos of Bush's Iraq war laid the conditions for the creation of ISIS, which largely evolved out of AQI. So in this alternate timeline, the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria never comes into existence. Instead, AQI remains a local terror force in Iraq. In 2007, President Dean shifts the focus towards domestic issues while trying to lay the groundwork for his re-election. And with early warning signs, he tries to pass financial regulation efforts. However, they are constrained by lobbying efforts. Basically, he's trying to regulate the market more to avoid potential catastrophes. But the market isn't an easy thing to regulate, especially not in the US. A thing Dean is far more successful with is healthcare. By July 2007, he narrowly passes the Dean Care Act, which basically is a slightly softer version of Obamacare. Republicans, of course, hate it and argue it's hurting the economy. Fox News outright calls the act socialism. The new Dean is a socialist label slowly begins to stick in far-right circles. They see his policies as attacks on personal liberties, but their attacks don't gain much ground outside of far-right circles. The job market is still very stable, and that helps Dean in his re-election campaign, which is now slowly picking up steam. The Democrats of course stick with him, saving their rising star Obama for later. Dean is simply fairly popular. Americans like how he handles domestic issues, and they can feel the increasing financial stability under him. But who would his contender be? You might think it'd be John McCain again. But remember, Dean's victory reshifted American politics drastically. He proved populism works, and his policy resulted in the GOP shifting further right. John McCain doesn't fit anymore. This time, the GOP has two other strong contenders, Mike Huckabee and Mitt Romney. Mike Huckabee is a Christian nationalist outsider that actually did pretty well in our timeline's 2008 primaries. This time, he's even stronger. But the GOP still has only started their shift towards right-wing populism. Mitt Romney, meanwhile, is the established technocrat, basically the opposite of Huckabee. Their debates are heated, but ultimately, Romney pulls ahead with his calm and collected appearance and strong economic messaging. Now, instead of fully running an anti-Dean campaign, Mitt Romney presents himself as a more grown-up alternative. The election largely resolves around economic issues. Iraq and the war on terror are still major talking points, but neither candidate focuses their campaign around it. Romney claims Dean bloated government at home and risked the economy, but Dean can counter that. After being attacked in the first debate, he states, "I ended the Iraq quagmire, kept Americans safe, gave millions healthcare, and built the clean economy of tomorrow." And Howard Dean has a point here. While the US has far less influence in the Middle East, the Iraq quagmire by 2008 is largely over. By the time of the election, almost all troops have returned home, and public opinion on the war has shifted drastically. Many Americans now see the war as largely pointless, but not because Dean backed down, because it was pointless in the first place. But the whole 2008 financial crash is happening right during the election. However, with Dean's earlier regulations and policies, the immediate effects are less severe, especially for the middle class. While the uncertainty hurts his approval slightly, his base remains highly energized. In this time, when Americans go to the polls in 2008, they aren't staring down a collapsing economy or an endless surge in Iraq. They are staring down two competing futures. Mitt Romney promises competence, stability, and a businessman's hand. Howard Dean promises to finish what he started. And in a narrow but decisive victory, Howard Dean becomes the first truly progressive president since FDR to win re-election. But the real showdown is still ahead. The GOP is now on its way to fully embrace the radical Tea Party movement. They certainly won't pick another technocrat like Mitt Romney in 2012. The Republicans need a populist. And while that shift is happening, President Dean has to consolidate his reforms. Can Dean really handle it? Even though Dean's earlier financial regulations softened the real estate bubble, the recession still hits hard in late 2008 and early 2009. Dean pushes a large stimulus package, including $600 billion focused on green jobs, infrastructure and state aid. Sort of a small Green New Deal, though it is a bit smaller than the stimulus package Obama passed in our time, simply because the economy isn't in such a bad spot. Now, Wall Street still gets bailed out, but the middle class is far more stable. However, the Occupy Wall Street movement still happens and even grows to bigger numbers than in our time, and it happens way earlier. With a progressive in the White House, debates about wealth inequality are much more widespread. Occupy Wall Street copies the tactics from Dean's presidential campaigns, which helps them grow quite massively throughout 2009 and 2010. And while Dean can't support the movement directly, as that would be seen as too radical, he does acknowledge their frustrations and increasingly talks about wealth inequality in speeches and press rooms. The GOP and Fox News continuously attack both Dean and the Occupy Wall Street movement. Fox News broadcasts headlines claiming that a socialist mob is taking over America's largest city, and some more radical Republican senators demand impeachments against President Dean for not condemning the movement. Those impeachment calls don't succeed, but they still mark a dark chapter in Dean's presidency. Abroad, the world is also beginning to look quite different. President Dean makes climate cooperation and diplomacy central at G20 and G7 meetings. America's ties with Europe are far stronger, and the two continents coordinate strongly on global climate policies and goals. In Iraq, only a shadow of the former US military might remains. Around 10,000 soldiers, largely special forces, are still stationed there. They basically just do training, aid and intelligence, no active combat. The Iraqi government is largely occupied with combating and containing AQI, which is increasingly boxed in, but also entrenched, stretching the conflict out. In Afghanistan, Dean authorizes a limited surge of special forces, but refuses full-scale escalation. The focus remains on surgical strikes and bin Laden. In 2010, in part to satisfy the Occupy Wall Street movement, Dean passes strong Wall Street reforms. Basically, a slightly stronger version of our timeline's Dodd-Frank reforms. The GOP hates it and attacks Dean furiously for it. Even public figures like Donald Trump and Wall Street moguls criticize him harshly. And with that newfound energy, the Republicans gain full power over both the House and Senate by the 2010 midterms. The remainder of Dean's presidency is largely a stalemate, with attacks from both sides growing louder. Basically, by 2011, America is entering full polarization mode, a status the country only reached around 2016 in our time. The same year, Dean announces a full withdrawal from Iraq, stating that the Iraqi government is now equipped to handle the crisis themselves. Trump on television calls President Dean a coward for the withdrawal. In the same year, tensions once again flare up in the Middle East with the Arab Spring protests. President Dean broadly voices support for pro-democracy movements, but chooses to avoid military entanglements, unlike Obama in our time, who directly intervened in Libya. By the end of 2011, the approaching election begins dominating headlines. With Dean's 8 years coming to an end, both parties are searching for their candidate. Dean's Vice President Wesley Clark performs very poorly in early polls and decides to stay out completely, and the Democrats have pretty much already agreed on their candidate. It's their rising star, Barack Obama. The Republican race is far more interesting. Mitt Romney tries to run again. However, by now the GOP has moved past establishment technocrats like him. The Christian populist Mike Huckabee also tries again, thinking this time the political climate is on his side. But he didn't calculate for one thing. There's one force entering the GOP neither Romney, nor Huckabee, nor anyone else can compete with. In late 2011, a certain guy that likes to dance and wear silly hats rides down a golden escalator in New York City to make an announcement. Yes, I am seriously saying that this alternate 2012 election would be between Barack Obama and Donald Trump. The mere concept of that is absolutely insane. Just imagine the debates between those two. That election would truly be legendary, no matter who wins. Obama's hopeful, young and charismatic energy versus Trump's raw insults and strongman appearance. A clash of two titans. And for how crazy and meme-like this sounds, in this alternate timeline, that election would almost be inevitable. Like, this is not some joke election I'm making up. This is, given the political context, the most likely outcome in my opinion. Obama is a rising star who is the perfect candidate to carry Dean's progressive torch forward, and Donald Trump is simply inevitable. He already toyed with running in 2012 in our timeline, but the political climate wasn't right, which is why he waited until 2016. In this alternate timeline, 2012 is the perfect time for him to enter politics, and there are literally no other strong contenders. Trump has an even easier time to secure the nomination. And now, the stage is set for the most legendary election I've ever come across in any of my alternate history scenarios. And honestly, it would almost feel wrong to only dedicate a part of this video to this absolutely insane election. And that's why I won't. Instead, I'll make a sort of bonus episode for this scenario that exclusively covers the Obama versus Trump election. How would their insane debates look like? Who would their VP candidates be? And of course, who would win this battle of two Goliaths? If you don't want to miss that insane showdown, subscribe and turn on notifications. And the reason I'm even gonna make this insane election scenario is once again because of a Patreon poll. Because today's video was chosen for a Patreon poll. And honestly, before starting to write the scenario, I thought it'd be a short, less serious video. And now I'm hyped to write a Obama versus Trump election in 2012. So thank you very much for every Patreon legend who participated in the poll. You all definitely made the right choice.